Good morning. My name is Mark Evans, and today I'm excited to be presenting to you about storytelling and setting the foundation for marketing and sales success. For the next 30 minutes, we're going to look at how startups and fast-growing companies can establish storytelling as a core part of their marketing and sales DNA. I'm going to show you some examples of storytelling in action and focus on the fundamentals of storytelling so that you can integrate storytelling into everything you do so that you can educate, entertain, and engage your target audiences. Now, during the day when I'm not talking about storytelling, I'm the Vice President of Marketing for a company in Toronto called Horizon, and we offer a knowledge platform to banks around the world so they can educate their employees and customers about digital apps, thereby improving digital fluency and driving digital adoption. Now, one of the things about storytelling, I think the fundamental thing about storytelling is stories make people do things. And when you look at storytelling, one of the things you need to think about is, why does storytelling matter? Why does it attract so much attention? If you do a Google search, you'll get millions of hits right away. And it really comes down to the fact that people are driven by stories to do things. And whether it's download an app or make a purchase or engage with somebody's consulting services, the fundamental thing is that stories actually cause people to take an action, and that's why storytelling really matters. And the time is right now, we need to be storytellers. I mean, there's no, it's not a nice to have, it's a need to have, because we live in an attention-starved world. People are multitasking, they're looking at things in rapid-fire fashion, they spend a lot of time on their smartphones, and so if you're not telling stories, then you're in trouble. So here's the reasons why storytelling matters. And it really comes down to, in my view, it comes down to three big numbers, or three numbers. 100,000, 7, and 2. And I'll go through each of the numbers so you can understand why this matters. So 100,000 is the number of words that people see or hear every single day. And we're talking about text messaging, the web, billboards, email, video games, Netflix, and perhaps even watching television. 100,000 words. And think about how much information is coming at people and how they're being overwhelmed by all this content. And if you're a brand and you want to capture someone's attention, then how are you going to make that happen? Well, it's about stories. And the second is 7 seconds. Now, according to Microsoft, and this may be urban myth, but the average person has an attention span of 7 seconds, which apparently is less than the average goldfish. Think about that. People aren't paying attention anymore. They're not really listening to what you're saying. They're not really reading your content because they're not paying attention. So if you don't capture their attention, and you don't tell stories that engage them, then you're not going to attract them. And the final number is 2 seconds. So when people look at your website, they spend 2 seconds to decide whether it matters to them or not. 2 seconds. And this is why storytelling matters more than ever. And if you're not telling stories, you're dead on arrival. All right, so that's the setting the stage for storytelling. And I don't mean to scare anybody or make storytelling intimidating, but I do want you to understand that storytelling has to be a key part of your marketing and sales activities. You cannot remain competitive, you cannot engage with prospects and customers if you're not telling them stories. So, how do you tell great stories? That's the $100 million question. How do you get people to pay attention to you? Well, it really comes down to what I regard as the fundamental thing when it comes to storytelling, and that is taking a customer-centric view of the world. It's all about your customers, their needs, their interests, what they're looking for, as opposed to you. It's about them, not you. Many startups make the classic mistake of being product-centric. They talk about their products, the benefits, the features, the prices, and I say somewhat tongue-in-cheek, all that is irrelevant. And by irrelevant, I mean is that people don't care about you, they care about them. They care about how your product is going to deliver on their needs. And that's sort of the initial message that you have to lead with when you're telling stories. And eventually you can talk about your product, benefits, and features, but it has to be about the customer. And customers want instant gratification. In this day and age, when they're not paying attention, when they have very low, when they're multitasking, if you don't satisfy their needs and interests, then they're going to leave. So you have to connect with them right away. And the way to do that is you tell them great stories. And stories are about experiences. So as I said earlier, it's not about price, features, or benefits. It's about what your product or service delivers, how it changes someone's life, whether it's personally or professionally. So it really has to be, they really have to understand quite quickly what it is about your product that's going to matter to them. And I cannot emphasize the importance of experiences when it comes to storytelling. Don't talk about your product, talk about how your product delivers, how it makes a difference. And in that regard, people need to be the stars in your stories. They need to see themselves in your marketing and sales. Again, it can't be about your product. Your product cannot be the star. It has to be your customers. So I'll give you a few examples of customers, the companies that are doing a great job of making their stars of the show. And the first one is Airbnb. So when you think about it, Airbnb doesn't position itself as a super convenient online service to book places to stay around the world. Now that would be true, but it would also be fairly uninspiring. Airbnb is the idea that if you're a customer, you can belong anywhere. You can travel anywhere around the world. You can experience new people, new places, new foods, and you can feel like it's part of enhancing your travel experiences. So Airbnb is the service or the product that makes traveling amazing and allows you to belong anywhere, regardless of where you are around the world. Another example is GoPro, right? So think about it. GoPro makes rugged mobile cameras that you can put on top of on your bicycle or on your hockey helmet or when you're skiing. But GoPro doesn't position itself up that way. It doesn't tell stories about, oh, we make this amazing rugged camera that you can put anywhere when you're playing sports or traveling. GoPro tells stories about your ability to capture life's most exciting moments and share them with others. That's the thing about GoPro. It's about your capturing those amazing times in your life, and then you're telling those stories on a bigger platform. And so that's number one in terms of experiences and making sure that your consumers are the stars of the action. Then the second fundamental when it comes to storytelling is leveraging the power of emotions. And here's the key, and this is why storytelling matters, is that you would think that people make decisions based on logic, but instead they make it on emotional and how they feel about something. So often we think that humans are thinking machines that feel. But the reality is that humans are feeling machines that think. So as I said earlier, it's the way that we feel about something as opposed to making a logical decision about a product or service. So I'll give you a couple of examples to sort of hammer home what this means in the real world. So you think about Apple. Now, I suspect that most people on this webinar own an Apple computer. Now, when you think about it logically, there's the reason to own an Apple computer has nothing to do with price, because Apples are more expensive. It has nothing to do with performance, because arguably PCs are just as powerful and just as useful as a Mac. So why do people buy Macs versus buying a Dell? Well, it's the way that Apple makes people feel. You feel like you're part of this amazing, cool tribe. You feel like you're pushing the envelope. You feel like you can be a better designer or a better creator or a better writer. You feel like you are part of something bigger. And that's the power of emotion. You don't feel that way when you buy a Lenovo or a Dell. You feel like you're buying a PC. So that is an example of the power of emotion. Another example is BMW. And when you think about BMW, you think about the idea that you own the road. You own this powerful machine, and you are in control of this, of where you want to go and how you want to do it. And that's part of the emotion of BMW. BMW is more than just a car. It's a way to demonstrate that who you are and the kind of car that you want to buy. And you think about Rolls-Royce, for example. Now, Rolls-Royce is a different kind of emotional reaction. Rolls-Royce is about owning something that's elite, something that very few people have. It's not about power. It's not about controlling the road. It's about making a statement. Now, what's interesting, when you think about it, is that BMW owns Rolls-Royce, yet they tell distinctly different stories for these two brands. And you might, if you didn't know that BMW owned Rolls-Royce, you might have a hard time figuring out that that was the case. But again, this is the power of emotions in action. This is how they get consumers to think about brands in different ways. Now, the third part of storytelling is obviously being creative. And it requires some out-of-the-box thinking sometimes. It requires risk-taking. And fundamentally, it just requires you to think about your consumer and think about the different ways, as I said earlier, that you can engage, educate, and entertain them. And if you can do one of those three things and do it in a creative way, then you're going to be successful. If you can do more than one, then your marketing and sales are going to be super successful. So I'll give you an example of creativity in action. Now, if you think about a product like baked beans, it's pretty boring, right? I mean, in North America, people love baked beans. They've been around for years. But how do you make baked beans engaging? How do you entertain people so they think about your brand in a different way? And I'll give you an example of a brand called Hanes, which decided to take a different approach to baked beans. And I'll show you a short video so you can understand where they're coming from. There might be a little bit of lag, but bear with me. But this is a good example of creativity and storytelling in action. So it's entertaining, and it certainly captures your attention, and it was very popular. This video attracted more than 21 million views, and ironically, at the same time, Heinz, which is a major food manufacturer in North America, they released their own video about baked beans. They are the world's biggest, I think they're the world's biggest baked bean maker. They released their own video on Facebook, and they got 14,000 views. So think about the power of creativity and the power of storytelling when it comes to a product like baked beans. But here's the thing, Hanes Baked Beans, the video you just watched, the company doesn't exist. It's a fictional ad by a video company in Singapore. And what they decided to do was make an experiment to see if creativity and storytelling could change how people engaged with a particular product, like baked beans, and it worked amazingly well. So just one example of storytelling in action. Another example of creativity is involves a Canadian Airlines story. So in Canada, there's one of our big airlines is Air Canada, and they have a brand called Rouge. And the people on Rouge were flying from 2 Canadian cities, and they had to land in another Canadian city, not their destination, because of bad weather. So it's late at night. The passengers are upset because they can't get to their destination, and they're hungry, but all the stores at the airport are closed because it's 11 o'clock at night. So they're sitting around and wondering what to do, and along comes a pilot from another airline called WestJet, and he says to the people, "Hey, are you hungry? Can I buy you pizza?" Now imagine this, you're at an airport with one airline, and the pilot from another airline comes by and asks if he can do something for you. And of course, people jumped on the idea of having pizza, especially free pizza, even if it was from a rival airline. And that caused a great sensation because people went on social media. WestJet pilot buys pizza for Air Canada passengers destined for St. John but stranded in Fredericton. And that was an amazing and creative move by a WestJet pilot. This has a couple things here. One is that you have to be opportunistic. And the second thing is that any of your employees can do things that can spark stories. And you have to look for storytelling opportunities when they arise. So from the WestJet point of view, this pilot, he just made a good gesture. He was trying to be a good person, but it happened to be a great story, and WestJet capitalized on that. But you might say to yourself, but I'm not a storyteller. That's not my skill set. I haven't been trained as a storyteller. I don't know how to tell stories, and that is absolutely wrong. Now you think about when you live your life. According to studies, we tell stories about 60% of the time. We're telling stories to our kids. We're telling stories about things that we've done on the weekend. You could argue that jokes are stories. We're telling stories about celebrities, and we're sharing gossip, and all that is storytelling. And so while you might not think of yourself as a storyteller, you are telling stories all the time. So I'm going to give you 5 different ways to tell stories. And so number 1 is that you tell origin stories. And these are for companies, different types of companies at different stages in their view. So if you're at the beginning of your company and you don't have a lot of customers, but you've got a product, what you can do is tell stories about how you got started, how you met your co-founder, what was the inspiration for your product or idea. And these kind of stories resonate. People love hearing stories about how entrepreneurs got their start. And I'll give you a couple of examples. One is the founder of Chipotle. He wanted to start a French restaurant, and he went to culinary school, but the cost of starting a restaurant was very, very high. So he decided to start a burrito restaurant on the side on the west coast of the US. And the restaurant did really, really well, so he started another one, and he started another one, and before long he had this giant chain of restaurants selling Mexican food. It's a great story about someone who intended to do one thing and did something completely else and was super successful. The second involves Richard Branson from Virgin Airlines. Everyone knows Richard Branson. So the story goes for Virgin Airlines is that Branson was going to visit the Virgin Islands to meet a young woman, and his connecting flight was canceled. So Branson was quite disappointed about what happened, but being an entrepreneur and being opportunistic, he decided to charter an airplane and then walked around the terminal with a blackboard advertising $39 flights to the Virgin Islands. And that flight, not surprisingly, sold out. And Branson thought to himself, this is a great idea for a business. Maybe I could start my own airline. And as I say, the rest is history. Another example of a great story from an entrepreneur who went on to enjoy some amazing successes. So tell your origin story, and you can use storytelling to provide some drama, to provide some excitement, to make it more interesting. It doesn't have to be straightforward. You can actually tell a great story that can capture the attention of people so that they can start learning more about what your product does. Second, especially if you're a startup, is talking about your challenges. You know, there's many entrepreneurs out there, and people who are not entrepreneurs who are really interested in what goes on behind the scenes. Like, what is it about a business that makes it successful along the way? And the thing about storytelling is your stories don't have to be positive stories. They can be negative and focus on some of the obstacles that you've had to overcome. So a great example is a company called Groove, which offers a chatbot for websites. And this was a blog post they posted, the story we haven't shared, how our startup almost died. And it's a really good example of being honest and connecting with people, because one of the things that storytelling does, it allows people to connect with your people, with your brand, and with your product. And in a competitive landscape, those connections matter. Being able to personalize your company and differentiate it is really important. And if you can talk about the ups and the downs, then it's a great way of getting people to connect with what you're doing and who you are. Another great way to stand out from the crowd is talk about what you think. And so it's thought leadership, it's op-ed pieces, it's content that's opinionated. And what you want to do is you want to generate two types of emotional responses. One is you want people to violently agree with you, saying you're absolutely right, this is amazing, and you want people to violently disagree with you. So they want you to either you're really right or they think you're really wrong. Being in the middle is not a great place to be, because people are like, well, whatever. In this case, this is an entrepreneur named Andrew D'Souza, Canadian entrepreneur, who wrote a letter, a public letter to the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, asking, after he won his election in 2015, asking him to support the Canadian tech industry. And it was a way for D'Souza to stand up from the crowd and say something that people would support or disagree with. And that's the whole idea of telling stories about what you think. Another great way to tell stories is stories about your customers. You know, people want to read about other types of customers. And if you're a prospect and you read about a customer, it makes you feel better about possibly doing business with a company. And if you're a customer and you read about other customers enjoying success, it makes you feel like you've made the right decision. So case studies are a great way of making that happen. Case studies are not necessarily the sexiest sales and marketing tools in the world, but they do work and they do validate what you're doing. In this case, there's a case study from HubSpot. I would go to HubSpot and I would check out their case studies. They're done really well. And they just tell great stories in different ways about how a customer used HubSpot and enjoyed great success, and here are the results that came out of that use of the product. Going back to Airbnb, they tell stories about their customers. In this case, the host, and this is Judith. She's a host in New York, and in Airbnb online and in their magazine, they talk about the experiences she's had, the people that she's met, and how being an Airbnb host has changed her life. And Airbnb also tells great stories about travelers and putting the spotlight on the experiences that people have enjoyed because they use Airbnb. Again, it's not about the product. It's not about an online service to book places around the world. It's about the experiences. In this case, this couple is enjoying the magic of Paris after dark. And one of the things that you'll that you'll discover if you dig a little bit deeper into the Airbnb website is that they've really started to enhance experiences as part of the travel experience. There's not just a place now to book a hotel or a house or a boat. You can also book experiences. If you're going to Paris, you book your apartment, and then you can book all kinds of different experiences to make Paris that amazing vacation, that place where you did all kinds of things and you felt, again, like you belonged and you were part of Paris. And the other way to tell stories is stories by your customers. Now, these are the most powerful stories because they're the most authentic. They're stories that people believe because you're not telling them, your customers are telling them. And again, GoPro is a great example of a brand that has managed to convince, or not even convince, their customers love the product so much that they share their stories on social media. But as important, GoPro has allowed its customers to share their stories on the GoPro website. So if you have a great story, if you shot a great video and you want to share it with the world, what you'll do is you'll submit it to GoPro, and then they'll select the best of the best and showcase them on the GoPro website. And what happens when your video is showcased on the GoPro website? You share with lots of people. And this has been an amazingly powerful marketing, sales, and storytelling vehicle for GoPro. So the bottom line, and I guess what I want you to come away with this presentation, is that the time for storytelling is now. You need to think about how storytelling can be an integral part of your marketing and sales activities. How can it separate your brand from the competition? How can you differentiate yourself in an ultra-competitive marketplace at a time when everyone else is using the same tools, the same marketing platforms, and the same channels? So the way to do that is to embrace storytelling. So think about what you're doing now, think about your marketing and sales activities, and think about how you can connect with your prospects and customers. And if you embrace storytelling, I'm very confident that your marketing and sales will be increasingly successful. So if you'd like to reach out to me and ask questions, I'd be very happy to answer your questions and provide you some more examples of storytelling in action. My email address is mark@markevans.ca. Thanks for listening to this webinar. I hope you got a good grounding on the fundamentals of storytelling, and enjoy the rest of the conference.